Welcome. We will be in the book of 2 Chronicles. We'll be finishing up Josiah. I've already talked about Manasseh and Ammon and the early reign of Josiah. So now we'll be in 2 Chronicles chapter 35, if you want to turn there. Second Chronicles chapter 35. And we'll look at verses 1 through 19 together. So 1 through 19. There's not even a lot of, there is a little bit of names and David's not here. Is there any volunteer for 1 through 19 of 2 Chronicles? We've got one over here, Austin. This kind-hearted woman. This is my mom, if you're visiting, that's why. 2 Chronicles 35, 1 through 19.
Now Josiah kept a Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem, and he slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th day of the first month. And he set the priests in their duties and encouraged them for the service of the house of the Lord. Then he said to the Levites who taught all Israel, who were holy to the Lord, "Put the holy ark in the house which Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, built. It shall no longer be a burden on your shoulders. Now serve the Lord your God and his people Israel. Prepare yourselves according to your fathers' houses, according to your divisions, following the written instruction of David, king of Israel, and the written instruction of Solomon his son. And stand in the holy place, according to the divisions of the fathers' houses of your brethren, and lay people, and according to the division of the fathers' house of the Levites. So slaughter the Passover offerings, consecrate yourselves, and prepare them for your brethren, that they may do according to the word of the Lord by the hand of Moses." Then Josiah gave the lay people lambs and young goats from the flock, all for Passover offerings, for all who were present, to the number of 30,000, as well as 3,000 cattle. These were from the king's possessions. And the leaders gave willingly to the people, to the priests and the Levites, Hilkiah, Zechariah, and Jehuel, rulers of the house of God, gave the priests for the Passover offerings 2,600 from the flock and 300 cattle. Also Coniah, his brother, Shimei and Nathaniel, and Hashabnah and Jabal, and Zobad, chief of the Levites, gave to the priests for the Passover offerings 5,000 from the flock and 500 cattle. So the service was prepared, and the priests stood in their place, and the Levites in their divisions, according to the king's command. And they slaughtered the Passover offerings, and the priests sprinkled the blood with their hands, while the Levites skinned the animals. Then they removed the burnt offerings, that they might give them to the divisions of the fathers' houses of the lay people, to offer to the Lord, and as is written in the book of Moses. And so they did with the cattle. Also they toasted the Passover offerings with fire, according to the ordinance. But the other holy offerings they boiled in pots, in cauldrons, and in pans, and divided them quickly among all the lay people. Then afterward they prepared portions for themselves and for the priests, because the priests, the sons of Aaron, were busy in offering burnt offerings and fat until night. Therefore the Levites prepared portions for themselves and for the priests, the sons of Aaron. And the singers, the sons of Asaph, were in their places according to the command of David, Asaph, Herman, and Jeduthun, the king's seer. Also the gatekeepers were at each gate, and they did not leave their position, because their brethren, the Levites, prepared proportions for them. So all the service of the Lord was prepared the same day, to keep the Passover and to offer burnt offerings on the altar of the Lord, according to the command of King Josiah. And the children of Israel who were present kept the Passover at that time, and the feast of unleavened bread for 7 days. There had been no Passover kept in Israel like that since the days of Samuel the prophet, and none of the kings of Israel had kept such a Passover as Josiah kept, with the priests and the Levites, all Judah and Israel who were present, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. In the 18th year of the reign of Josiah, this Passover was kept.
Thank you. So Josiah keeps the Passover, and he does it correctly this time. It's on the correct date, and toward the end of the reading there, it says, kept according to the law of Moses. So this is a little better than Hezekiah's keeping of said Passover. The ark is brought back there in verse 3, and it looks like that somehow sometime during either Manasseh or Ammon's reign that they pulled the ark out, whether that was by command of the king or by forward-thinking priests, if we got to get this out of here before they either defile it, and then the kings wanted room for their idols. So according to John Trapp, who wrote a commentary on the Old and New Testament, he says, the Hebrews tell us, now this has got to be in the Talmud somewhere, but I could not find it. All the searching I was doing was all in Hebrew, and I do not read Hebrew. So anyway, according to John Trapp, he says, the Hebrews tell us that the priests in these idolatrous times had carried the holy ark out of the temple, that it might not stand there among those heathenish idols, and conveyed it to the house of Shallum, who was uncle to the prophet Jeremiah and husband to the prophetess Huldah. And we talked about Huldah on Wednesday when she prophesied that disaster's coming, but not during Josiah's time. So the ark is being brought back. And then when it says it's not a burden on your shoulders, that shows that the ark wasn't at rest in the holy place of the temple where it belonged, and the time was overdue to return it to the temple where it belonged. And then I really like this part, that Josiah is personally donating. We've seen a lot of the times, especially once people get to be kings or get to be in power, they're like, what can you guys do for me? Now Josiah says, look, I'm the king. I'm doing pretty all right for myself. Here, have some of my livestock so that we may sacrifice for everyone. And then all these other officials follow suit. They're donating hundreds and thousands of animals to complete this Passover feast for everybody else, or so everybody else can celebrate. And no Passover, not even Hezekiah's, it hasn't been kept like this since the days of Samuel at the end of Judges and the beginning of 1 Samuel. It's not just a clever name. Thank you. That's all I need, some smiles. That's all we're looking for. Get a little blood mowing this morning. I only had 1 cup of coffee also, so we'll get it going.
Mark, a question for you. I know that seems like only yesterday, but a couple of lessons ago, we talked about Hezekiah and how he had the Passover. Now, granted, he did it in the wrong time, but there was questions about whether that was because they had to get the priest back and sanctified and do all of those things. But it was highlighted at that point that the Passover had it's insinuated that it had not been kept for a significantly long time. We're not
since the days of Solomon.
Yes, days of Solomon. And then we know we have a relatively long reign of Manasseh. At the end, we hear how Manasseh turns back and at least clears things from around Jerusalem. As far as I know, we're not told whether he observes the Passover during that time he comes back. We know Ammon doesn't. So it's interesting, kind of wondering, okay, Hezekiah had gone all in on this, and then Josiah comes in and goes all in like that, and then we get that statement that no Passover like it since Samuel's day. I just because we certainly, when we read about what Hezekiah did, it was fairly sizable as well, and the amount that he donated from his personal possessions. So it's kind of interesting when we reflect that there was that gap there, a long gap until we got to Hezekiah, then a shorter gap until we get to Josiah. But it's clearly, it's like these high points of the Passovers, and I just think it's interesting when we reflect on it, and then assume that Josiah is going to continue those through his reign until he passes away.
No, I agree. And this is kept during the 18th year of Josiah's reign. And to Drew's point, I don't know if they kept it every year at the appointed time or not, but this is what is recorded for us in Scripture. Like Drew said, these are the high points, and this is also the last high point for the kingdom of Judah. So enjoy it while it lasts.
I think the emphasis is on the scale of people keeping this. I mean, just 30,000 lambs and goats just from Josiah and 3,000 bulls. It's not that it was never kept in all these years. It was not to the scale where everybody's keeping it like
Right.
they're supposed to. I imagine that there were some who always kept it throughout this era, but it's just that everyone was doing it. It seems to me to be the emphasis.
No, you're probably right. The thing about history is that you have to be renowned enough to be mentioned, and then it has to be as a big deal for it to be mentioned. When we get into Nebuchadnezzar and the handful of slides, I actually found the Chronicles and was reading through them, and entire years of his reign are like 3 sentences, and this is what he had dictated. So it's not quite like us where we have a biographer. You know, you can read a biography on Abraham Lincoln or pick your president. There's somebody right next to him all day writing down that he had, you know, scrambled eggs and bacon on July 14th for breakfast. Something like that. That this is not the case now. You've said it many times that a lot of the time Scripture isn't the history that we want, but it's the history we have. And so, long story short, I agree, Aaron. Any other comments on the Passover?
This is just a minor point. In kind of the parallel account in 2 Kings 23 and verse 22, it says not only since Samuel's day, but it says for no such Passover had been kept since the days of the judges who judged Israel just in general. So I wanted to bring that out, that it's been a really long time since the nation saw a Passover like this.
Right. And the period of the judges wasn't horribly long after the return. Oh, nothing. Okay. Back to 2 Chronicles 35. We'll finish out the chapter. Anybody want to read 20 through 27? No priest names. I think Amy was about to get voluntold.
Amy refused to look at that point. Okay. Talking about Josiah being killed in battle, starting in verse 20. After all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho, king of Egypt, went up to fight at Carchemish on the Euphrates. And Josiah went out to meet him. But he sent envoys to him, saying, "What have we to do with each other, king of Judah? I am not coming against you this day, but against the house with which I am at war. And God has commanded me to hurry. Cease opposing God, who is with me, lest he destroy you." Nevertheless, Josiah did not turn away from him, but disguised himself in order to fight with him. He did not listen to the words of Necho from the mouth of God, but came to fight in the plain of Megiddo. And the archers shot King Josiah. And the king said to his servants, "Take me away, for I am badly wounded." So his servants took him out of the chariot and carried him in his second chariot and brought him to Jerusalem. And he died and was buried in the tombs of his fathers. All Judah and Jerusalem mourned for Josiah. Jeremiah also uttered... how far do you want me to go, Mark?
All the way through the end.
Okay. Jeremiah also uttered a lament for Josiah. And all the singing men and singing women have spoken of Josiah in their laments to this day. They made these a rule in Israel. Behold, they are written in the laments. Now, the rest of the acts of Josiah and his good deeds according to what is written in the law of the Lord and his acts, first and last, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah.
Thank you, Drew. So Josiah decides to engage the Egyptian army, and they're heading up to Carchemish, and we'll talk about why they're going up there in the next slide. But this is part of a geopolitical struggle between the Assyrian Empire, which is in strong decline at this point, and between Babylon, which is very much on the rise, and Babylon will be in full power very, very soon. So the Assyrians had made an alliance with the Egyptians to try to defeat Babylon, to keep their empire going on. And so that's what this is. This is why Egypt is coming up through Canaan, however you want to, whatever zone you're looking at. And Josiah meets them at Megiddo. And then Necho is the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt here, and he says, "Why are you opposing God? Cease opposing God." And this is him talking to Josiah. And I don't know if he's using Jehovah's name or if he's just saying a God. It's God is capital G in my ESV, but it's not Lord in all caps. So I don't know which God. But then verse 22 says that this is coming from the mouth of God. So I think that it's Jehovah. I have no reason to believe that it's not. But regardless, Josiah comes up against them, and then he gets this message from the Pharaoh and still doesn't listen to the mouth of God. And it's not at all like, if you'll recall, Jehoshaphat, when we talked about him, that before every battle, even when he is allying with Israel, it's like, is there no prophet to inquire of the Lord? Let's inquire of the Lord. And then even when Ahab brings out all these prophets, he goes, I don't like any of these guys. Isn't there a real prophet we could consult with to find out the Lord's will regarding this battle? And there's two instances, if you recall, 1 Kings 22:5 and 2 Kings 3:11 is when Jehoshaphat, those are two times when he's like, let's inquire of the Lord before we go fight. There's no recorded instance of Josiah asking this or even praying himself. He wants to go. And then one thing that I didn't notice, because I've been using the ESV, and it says in verse 22, he disguised himself. I think it's the King James just says he puts on his armor. Does anybody have anything that doesn't say disguise, that Josiah disguises himself in 22? There is some, I think it's someone trying to doubt, but said this is awfully like the Ahab story, so we're not 100% sure if this is right. I have no reason to disbelieve this, but it is interesting that it parallels there. And it wasn't until I had read a different piece, also looking for that Talmud writing, that it talks about he donned his armor and instead of disguising himself. And I was like, adds a little different flavor to it. But Adam Clark, this is Christopher Knapp. He says, if it was not of faith, else why would Josiah disguise himself? There's no record of any prayer before the battle. And as in the case of so many of his godly ancestors, like we mentioned Jehoshaphat before, and this rash act of Josiah seems unaccountable. That is Christopher Knapp's opinion. And then he's shot by arrows. And it doesn't say at random like it does with Ahab. And he's badly wounded, and he leaves there. And he dies and is buried at Jerusalem. Going back, the exact place of the battle seems to be called a place called Hadad-Drimon in the valley of Megiddo, because if we turn to Zechariah chapter 12, verse 11, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah 12:11, and this is just a quick reference, so I'll read it there. It says, on that day, the mourning in Jerusalem will be as great as the mourning for Hadad-Rimon in the plain of Megiddo. And then this is Adam Clark writing. He says that was the great mourning for Josiah. So that's just something that it comes back up, and that there is a mass mourning, that they are very upset. The general population are very upset about this death of Josiah. He's a good king. Let me get back. He's mourned by all, including Jeremiah. We've referenced Jeremiah a lot, and will continue to do so. But I think that's also a rousing endorsement of your reign, is when what we call a major prophet is also moved to mourn as well. Also, Adam Clark, there are other great kings of Judah and the United King of Israel, such as David and Hezekiah, yet one thing that made Josiah unique was his godliness in his day. He lived in a remarkably wicked time, so his godliness was remarkable against the backdrop of the times. David was a greater, but not a better man than Josiah, according to Adam Clark, and I think that's a good measuring stick that he chose when they found the law, he chose to listen, even though they're coming out of these awful kings who did not listen at all to the Lord and were actively against Jehovah. Josiah chose, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to follow the law of the Lord, and did so. Comments, questions? Nothing going on? One right here.
Just to back up to your first point, God in this text is Elohim, which is a plural generic form of God.
Right.
Nico, we know from history, he believed in all the gods. He would never refer to Yahweh, Jehovah, as
the God.
God. He's literally saying, why are you standing away? The gods have told me to do this. He's also, God is not sending him, the Lord is not sending him to this battle because he's about to go lose. I don't think God is causing him to go up there for that at all. So I'm real hesitant I think Josiah probably didn't consult God on this.
Right.
But I don't think that
that Nico is speaking for God?
Yeah, Nico's not speaking for the Lord. That it doesn't add up in my understanding.
I'm okay with that. Any other comments?
Still more on Josiah engaging with the Egyptian army. I think it's really just ironic because we know that God had told his people, don't rely on Egypt in your time of trouble, they can't save you. And if you go back and look at the account of Hezekiah in 2 Kings 18:21, Assyria basically goes to Judah and says, Egypt is that broken reed of a staff which will pierce the hand of any man who leans on it. And now the shoe's on the other foot, where Assyria's like, we're in trouble from Babylon, so what are we going to do? We're going to rely on Egypt. And they're about to find out how right they were when they said that. And so I think that's just interesting to note. And then the other thought that I had was in 2 Kings 23:29, kind of the parallel account to this. It says that King Josiah went to meet Necho in battle, and Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo as soon as he saw him. So I think there's just this note that Josiah gets ready for this battle, disguises himself, and goes, and he gets shot almost immediately.
Right.
And so clearly God was not telling him to do that.
Oh, I agree. And it's possible that Josiah wanted out from under Assyria, not knowing that Babylon would be even worse. And was like, well, I'm going to the enemy of the ally of my enemy. Anyway, I'm going to stop this union before it even happens, and it does not work out. Well, go ahead.
Mark, if I'm not incorrect, I think Egypt was actually going up to support Assyria against Babylon. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting thing because if Judah wants to get out from underneath,
I think he wanted Assyria to lose, so he wanted to stop their allies from reinforcing them.
Got it. Okay.
No, that's if I'm ever unclear, which I sure I am, yeah. And then. In the Austin reference, the verse below, 2 Kings 23, in 26 and 27, it talks about this judgment coming. This is right after the Passover and right before his death that whoever wrote or chronicled the 2 Kings in verses 26 and 27 of 2 Kings 23. It says, still the Lord did not turn from the burning of his great wrath, by which his anger was kindled against Judah, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. And the Lord said, I will remove Judah also out of my sight, as I have removed Israel. And I will cast off this city that I have chosen, Jerusalem, and the house of which I said, my name shall be there. So he's talking about, I'm removing the kingdom of Judah and the city of Jerusalem and the temple. So this judgment coming is very severe, and it's tucked right in here in 2 Kings 23, right before Josiah's death. So like I said before, that Passover is the last high point in the kingdom of Judah. We've referred to this man, David Guzik, who has written this a lot of the commentary I've been using. But he says, nevertheless, not long after his reign, talking about Josiah, Judah was severely judged by the Lord. This shows that despite all of Josiah's efforts, there was an outward conformity among the people of Judah, yet their hearts were not really turned toward the Lord. It says, actually, this is John Trapp, I'm sorry. He also wrote another commentary that I've already referred to. They pretended and professed to do so, but most of them dissembled and dealt deceitfully, not turning to God with their whole hearts, as good Jeremiah complaineth. And then this is when David Guzik talks about Jeremiah. Jeremiah ministered in the days of Josiah, and his message to the people of Israel shows this. Through Jeremiah, God promised that if the people genuinely turned to him, they would dwell in the land securely. And that's in Jeremiah 7:5. It talks about that. And he says, nevertheless, God looked at the people of Judah, and then quotes Jeremiah 3:10. Judah has not turned to me with her whole heart, but in pretense. So that's the idea of these two men, that although everybody was partaking in these reforms, it might have been that Josiah was so good, he's like, you will follow this. And they're like, okay, we'll do this. But apparently their heart wasn't in it. Kind of like Laodicea. They were lukewarm, like, all right, we'll go Passover, we'll have a good time there. But that is, when you're looking at some of Jeremiah's writings, that is possibly the reason why the judgment is still coming. And then remember that the provocations of Manasseh are so strong that I do believe that Manasseh truly repented, but the people were already gone. And it's the nation that God's looking at. Although a handful of kings have staved off this judgment that is coming, especially Hezekiah. But the judgment is coming because the people are still worshiping on every high hill and all the different idols of all the different lands. And it keeps getting worse that they're bringing in Babylonian gods now and all sorts of stuff. So any comments before we move on from this? Aaron?
Yeah, Jeremiah and Kings and Chronicle paint two different pictures, and the right way to understand it is to combine them together. Jeremiah is, they're all God's word, but Jeremiah he's a pessimist. So he spins everything in a pessimistic way, where the Chronicles are accounts of what the kings did, so they tend to be more a little on the rosy side.
Right.
So reality is I think somewhere in the middle of those two, but you can't just stick one or the other in isolation because you can get the wrong picture. But you're right; these people turn back somewhat, but the dice already been cast. The sins of Manasseh have already been done. They don't go back to the sins of Manasseh in Josiah's day, but the judgment's already coming. It's just a matter of time till it gets here.
This is for the history majors, the map lovers, and the particularly military history. This is the green arrows that are coming up from the south there, down here. This is the Assyrio-Egyptian forces, and was it orange? Orange is Babylon. So that's why they start in Babylon. It's not also just a clever name. Babylon is rising power. It captures Nineveh in 612. And we're going in BC, so remember that gets smaller as we get closer to Jesus. So 612, a couple of years before, they come up from Babylon and they capture Nineveh, which was a big city. That's why Jonah was sent there. It's a major city. Assyria then goes to Haran. If you remember, Haran is where Laban lived, and Jacob went there to get some wives. So that's where that is. He was commanded to go there. He went there. Haran is then taken in 609. And so Assyria leaves their new capital and they go over here. Carchemish, that's where our home will be. And then Babylon meets them there. And the Battle of Carchemish is a huge deal in secular history. This is when Assyria is nearly finished. This is the first battle, and there'll be a second battle 4 years later. But the Battle of Carchemish is what Necho is heading up toward, that star-looking, explosion-looking deal. That's the battle site. Egypt is marching to aid Assyria. Josiah tries to intercept Necho down here in Megiddo, which I'm sure Stephen is talking about because that's also where you get Armageddon, from that place right there. But that's a different talk for a different class. I'm going to find a good place for this microphone. There we go. And then the motive's not clear, but perhaps he was trying to get out from under Assyrian rule by engaging the ally of Assyria. And then the second battle of Carchemish, which we'll talk about here in a second, is 605, and that completely ends Assyria. Babylon is fully set as the empire. So that's just for your knowledge. It's kind of stuff I like. So I included it. Now we'll go on to the final kings of Judah, the last kings of Judah. This picture is a lion that's from the Ishtar Gate there in Berlin. This is taken by a man named Jan van der Graben, and it's from worldhistory.org. That's this man's website, and it's a pretty good website. It's kind of like an encyclopedia. I've used it several times, but make sure I give him credit for that. I chose the lion because the lion is the symbol of Judah, and it's the symbol of this Babylon, one of the symbols. They also like dragons and bulls as well. Those are the other images on this Ishtar Gate. But this is, it's constructed around 575, so later in the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar II, who is the Nebuchadnezzar we'll talk about. He's Nebuchadnezzar II. It's made of fired bricks and decorated with animals made in glazed bricks. And anyway, that'll be the image for this class. Oh, I got to get out of Kings and go to Chronicles. We'll go to 2 Chronicles 36, unless there's anything further about Josiah. 36, 1 through 4. Anybody want to volunteer for that? This mic hates me. Thank you.
Then the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and made him king in place of his father in Jerusalem. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. Then the king of Egypt deposed him at Jerusalem and imposed on the land a fine of 100 talents of silver and 1 talent of gold. The king of Egypt made Eliakim, his brother, king over Judah and Jerusalem, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. But Necho took Jehoahaz, his brother, and brought him to Egypt.
All right, so that's the long, storied reign of Jehoahaz. The people make him king. So this is kind of a new thing. He is called Shallum, and he's perhaps the youngest, and this is in 1 Chronicles, and the slides I sent you said 2 Chronicles, because I'm looking at that. My computer was updating, and I'm like, oh, I need to fix that. It's going to bother me, and it took forever to update. So that's when I read the articles. In 1 Chronicles, at the beginning here in chapter 3, it's kind of like a genealogy, a listing of all the kings. It's pretty interesting. I'm guessing that was written long after the fact. But if you look at 1 Chronicles 3 and verse 15, it says, the sons of Josiah, Jehohanan, the firstborn, the second Jehoiakim, the third Zedekiah, the fourth Shallum. So he's perhaps the youngest, and we'll talk about that later. It looks that way according to this part right here. Maybe Zedekiah is, but according to the beginning of Chronicles, it's Shallum is the same guy as Jehoahaz. And we don't know anything about Jehohanan, so he either died early or maybe he died in Egypt or against Egypt. We don't know. We don't know anything about him as far as I know. And I think that's it there. He reigns 3 months, not long. And in 2 Kings 23, it adds, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So we come right out of Josiah, and we got a man made king by the people, does evil in the sight of the Lord. Only has 3 months to do evil, but he does it anyway. And then Necho comes back and he installs Eliakim, who is also, and that's his name. And then Necho says, no, your new name is Jehoiakim. And we'll see that again too. He exacts a heavy tribute, takes Jehoahaz as prisoner, and then he dies in Egypt. If we'll turn over to 2 Kings 23. Yeah, if you'll just look up there, he did what was evil in 32. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. And then in 34, took Jehoiada, Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the place of Josiah's father, changed his name Jehoiakim, and then this part. But he took Jehoahaz away, and he came to Egypt and died there. So we know from combining the two accounts that he dies in Egypt. And then we also get, if we go to Ezekiel, we get a little stronger picture. And we'll also look at Jeremiah as well. Ezekiel 19, oh, there it is. Ezekiel 19, 1 through 4. Ezekiel writes, and you take up a lamentation for the princes of Israel and say, what was your mother? A lioness. Among lions she crouched. In the midst of young lions she reared her cubs. And she brought up one of her cubs, and he became a young lion, and he learned to catch prey. He devoured men. The nations heard about him. He was caught in their pit, and they brought him with hooks to the land of Egypt. So that sounds a lot like Jehoahaz. So it calls him a young lion and devouring, or proud, and learned to catch prey and devoured men and things like that. And then turn to Jeremiah. (22) 10 through 12. Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 22, verse 10, weep not for him who is dead, nor grieve for him, but weep bitterly for him who goes away, for he shall return no more to see his native land. For thus says the Lord concerning Shallum, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, who reigned instead of Josiah his father, who went away from this place. He shall return here no more, but in the place where they have carried him captive, there he shall die, and he shall never see this land again. So Ezekiel and Jeremiah both tell this story of Jehoahaz, that he's going to be carried off to Egypt. He's not coming back. He's dying there. And we don't know a whole lot about this. Let's read it. This man is a man named Robert Jameson. He wrote another commentary. It says, immediately after Josiah's overthrow and death, the people raised, and overthrow is interesting language there, but we'll talk about that maybe. The people raised to the throne Shallum, and afterwards called Jehoahaz, in preference to his older brother Eliakim, from whom they expected little good. Jehoahaz is said to have received at Jerusalem the royal anointing, a ceremony not usually deemed necessary in circumstances of regular and undisputed succession. So remember, if you're just the oldest son, and kind of like Solomon with Rehoboam, you're the man, you're the guy. Kind of like David and Solomon. This is the heir to the throne. Okay. But the people put Jehoahaz up there and anointed him. It seems to be resorted to in order to impart greater validity to the act of popular election, and it may be to render it less likely to be disturbed by Necho, who, like all Egyptians, would associate the idea of sanctity with regal anointing. He was the youngest son, but the popular favorite, probably on account of his martial spirit, and that is where that Ezekiel, when he calls him a lion among lions devouring prey, that's where he gets that thought from, and determined opposition to the aggressive views of Egypt. At his accession, the land was free of idolatry, but this prince, instead of following the footsteps of his excellent father, adopted the criminal policy of his apostatizing predecessors. Although through his influence, directly or indirectly, idolatry rapidly increased. and he references 2 Kings that we've already read. The name Jehoahaz means the Lord has seized, and this is probably a throne name since his name's Shallum, but that's interesting since he's made king by the will of the people. I don't know if they picked that name or not, but this is the mighty reign, 3 months. Any questions or comments about this man? And then while we're looking at it, I made a chart because it'll get confusing.
Yeah, they're different mothers.
Yes.
The obvious. That's why there's some rivalry. But what I was going to say, the reason he reigns 3 months is because when Pharaoh Necho is going up and Josiah's killed trying to stop him, Necho goes up, loses the battle, but comes back down. He's taking vengeance now on Judah for doing that. Josiah's dead, so he takes the king now, his son, and takes him down to Egypt. So it's not. That's the why. It's vengeance.
Right. I did read some conflicting timelines to that because it's a little hazy when he goes and when he comes back. Because sometimes it was saying this might be 609. Others were saying it's later, but I tend to agree with you that, yeah, he's coming down to at least beat up on the people who tried to beat up on him. Go ahead.
I think it's interesting, Jameson's comment about the people made Shallum the king instead of Eliakim because they expected little good from Eliakim, and yet Shallum is so bad that he only reigns for 3 months, and he still gets the designation that he's evil in the sight of the Lord.
Right.
So he didn't waste any time, but apparently he was better than the alternative, which is not a good sign.
Right. And I wonder, just from going back to Aaron's point and Ezekiel's point, calling him a lion looking to devour prey, if maybe it was we'll just take care of Egypt once and for all and we'll be the dominant southern power while they're headed down, whether Necho wanted revenge or Jehoahaz was like, kind of like Rehoboam, I'll show him that my dad wasn't even a real king. I'm a real king. And then they imprison him so that he dies in Egypt. Once again, this chart, it'll get a little confusing. The numbers are the order of their reigns. So it goes Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, Zedekiah. You think, oh, that seems straightforward. But when it starts talking about the son of, and then Josiah's son, and this is it. And Aaron's right, they had different mothers, some of them. But it was, I thought, easier and clearer if we have this chart and you can refer back to it. I put it here, and it'll be again at the end because there's a reason I added all those other names. But yeah, we'll just start. We'll start with Jehoiakim. If we'll go back to 2 Chronicles 36, we'll at least read this before the bell rings. 2 Chronicles 36, and we'll look at verses 5 through 8. Second Chronicles 36, 5 through 8. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Against him came up Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in chains to take him to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also carried part of the vessels of the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his palace in Babylon. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and the abominations that he did and what was found against him, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah, and Jehoiachin his son reigned in his place. So this is an 11-year reign. And if we look back in verse 4, he is named Jehoiakim by Necho. When he takes Jehoahaz down and kills him, let him die in a prison, whatever he did, he says, you're the king now, and your name is Jehoiakim. And his given name, Eliakim, is God will establish, and Jehoiakim is Yah will establish. So that's interesting. That also, to Aaron's point, the way we've talked about a little bit already, that the way the ancient world looks is that Yahweh is the God here in this spot. And we have these gods over here. Remember that story where God is a God of the hills but not of the valleys? we'll fight in the valleys, and then God wins there too. So that's the thought there, that you are God here, this is your king here, we'll be in Egypt where we're in power. It's what I think might have happened. I think that's a pretty good stopping place. We'll probably reread this again, and then we'll look at a lot of what Jeremiah has to say about Jehoiakim on Wednesday. Any further questions before we wrap up? Thanks, everybody. See you on Wednesday, Lord willing.